Hello, this is Simon, broadcaster and traveller. Welcome to the latest edition of Pod World. Well, hello, I'm back on the road again. I've come to one of the most brilliant of European destinations. It's another capital city. It's on the banks of the Danube, and it is the most splendid and spectacular capital of Austria. We're in Vienna. There is so much to tell you about Vienna, and time will restrict what I'm able to convey to you. But I thought we'd start here at the Hofburg, and the Hofburg is really the central point that typifies what Vienna is all about, because it is the home of the royal palace. The Hofburg is so vast, and the surrounding buildings, it probably is worthy of a podcast series all of its own. But to try and summarize what it is, if you approach it from St. Michael's Square, you'll come to a massive Baroque arch full of architecture and sculpture. And to the right is a museum dedicated to the memory of Elizabeth, the wife of Franz Joseph II. So basically the empress who was ruling Austria and Hungary in the 19th century, a contemporary of Britain's Queen Victoria. On the left, and in a vast area beyond, is the very famous Spanish riding school. And just a brief bit of history, the Habsburgs, who are the Austrian emperors, did for a time also govern Spain, and having the Spanish riding school here is a legacy of that time. Come through further piece of architecture, and away to the left hand side there's another museum. It's full of museums. This one is dedicated to the artifacts collected by the Habsburgs. It includes the crown jewels and allegedly the first crown that the Habsburgs and their forebears had, which goes back more than 1,000 years. And then we open out into a huge square, and the beauty of the Hofburg is that it is open to the public, the general public, without an admission fee. The grounds are available for people to stroll in, and my goodness, people do. And they are greeted by the copper statue, enormous figure of Prince Eugene of Savoy, who was in his time the leading general of the Austrian army during the time of the early 18th century. And he's most famed, I guess, for joining an unlikely alliance with British forces led by the Duke of Cumberland for a victory at Blenheim against the French. I say unlikely because the Austrians and the British were not really like-minded allies, but sort of taking the theme of my enemy's enemy is my friend, then both had reason to stop the French expanding, and therefore you get Blenheim and a victory for the Allied forces of Austria and Great Britain. There's more to read about that. I'm not going into that at all. I'll just take you further through the Hofburg grounds, and there is the Museum of History on the left hand side as you're heading out towards away with St. Michael's at your back, a natural history museum, and then parkland and most wonderful cake-like buildings for you to absorb in and around this area. If you want archetypal Vienna, the Hofburg Palace is just the right place to start your tour of Vienna. I've moved out to the edge of central Vienna. I'm in Belvedere Park, and I'm here because I've just been in one of the most extraordinary museums this place has to offer. Now, I say that, I must confess an interest. I have studied Austrian history at university. The museum is the Museum of Military History, or the Kriegsmuseum, and it has three sort of central pillars to it, if you will. The first is a group of marble statues featuring the main emperors of the Austrian Empire, the Holy Roman Emperors as they call themselves, defending the Catholic faith, and their military advisors surrounding them. And to the right is a room that looks very much at the reign of Franz Joseph I, so effectively the whole of the 19th century and into the earliest 20th century, with a collection of military uniforms and paraphernalia. And finally, in the last room, is the most extraordinary artifact that is worth the admission fee alone, and the admission fee is not high. It is the vehicle in which the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife was assassinated in Sarajevo in 1914, thus putting in place the chain reaction that causes the Great War, what we now call World War I. And there then follows an exhibition that takes you through the 4 years of Austria's involvement in that World War and how it ultimately led to the collapse of the Austrian-Hungary Empire, and how nation states that we recognise today were formed out of the bloody conflict of 1914, 1918. Like I say, I express a personal preference because I studied it. I did have a bit of a backstory going into there, but just to see the vehicle, which I hadn't really prepared for because I hadn't really clocked that that was there, was just extraordinary. So that's the Military Museum in Belvedere Park. I mentioned earlier about the statues that surround the emperors, and one of them is our friend Prince Eugene of Savoy. Earlier I mentioned that he was in alliance with the Duke of Cumberland in England. I got my dukes mixed up. It wasn't the Duke of Cumberland at all. It was the Duke of Marlborough, John Churchill, who fought with Eugene of Savoy in Blenheim against the French. So I thought I'd correct that once for all. But anyway, here we are in the beautiful Belvedere Park on a beautiful spring day, having just seen an extraordinary exhibition of Austro-Hungarian history. About 10 minutes walk from the Military Museum, across Belvedere Park, you come to the place where the whole area is named after, and that is the Belvedere Palace. Now you remember our old friend Eugenie of Savoy, Eugene, depends which language you're using. He had this built. It was reward for his hard work in battle, no doubt. And as he looks over these splendidly laid out gardens, he must have thought, job well done. It is just a measure of Austria opulence. Like so many of the great buildings of this city, this almost stands alone. It's a splendid, splendid building. And if you're hearing a bit of banging in the background or an occasional power tool, that's because it's getting on a bit and it's always undergoing renovation. Inside it holds a great array of artwork from Renaissance to modern masters like Gustav Klimt. The Belvedere Palace, an outstanding part of this amazing city, Vienna. Well, we've dealt with the Habsburgs and we've looked at the consequences of the conflict between 1914 and 1918 and Austria's part in it. But Vienna is obviously famed for something more artistic than war and empire, and that of course is music. Now 20 minutes walk or a direct tram service brings you to Stadtpark, where a number of the celebrated Austrian composers have statues in their honour, including Schubert, and the man I'm sitting next to, the gilded figure of Johann Strauss playing his violin. It really is a magnificent monument, much photographed. It's probably on the cover of many a travel guide, and what a perfect place to enjoy the spring sunshine of Vienna by looking at the figurine of Johann Strauss with the barista on my right preparing people coffees as they also take in the beautiful scene that is here at Stadtpark. Johann Strauss described it as blue and beautiful, and on a spring sunny day like today you can see what he meant. It's the Danube River. And I'm at Donau Insel, which is an island, well, it stretches the whole length of Vienna in the middle of the river. And as you look out, you're actually reminded that Vienna has moved from the time where both banks would have been beside the river. The centre is now 2.5 miles to the north. But in the time of the Habsburgs, of course, this was a great entrepot, one of the longest rivers in Europe, and this was like a cultural meeting point from the east into the Ottoman Empire, to Turkey, and to the west into Germany and the Low Countries. It's an extraordinary river, and it really creates the atmosphere that Vienna was built around. It's not to be missed, and it's really easy to get to. But strangely, unlike Budapest, where the river is in the middle, here in Vienna, the Danube is not. If it's churches you're after, then Vienna is the place for you. There are loads and loads of them. Let me pick out 3 outstanding examples, starting with Karlskirche, Charles's Church, a Baroque example with a beautiful green roof, and you'll find that in Karlsplatz, easy to get to by underground or by tram. Not far away, the main cathedral of Vienna, and that is St. Stephen's. St. Stephen's is where Mozart got married. It's also, very sadly, where Niki Lauda's funeral was held. Right in the middle of town. It was first started in the late 12th century. It took 300 years to build. It's got a beautiful ornate roof, but it does have a problem. And that is that over the years, particularly in the 19th century, buildings were allowed to be built around it. So the best way to view it is actually quite a way away from St. Stephen's. It's very hard to get up close to appreciate its beautiful ornate spire, for example. And that's why my favourite church is a bit newer. This is the Volvikkirche, and this is not far from St. Stephen's. You can actually see it and you can walk it. And this was commissioned in the mid-19th century after a failed assassination attempt on Franz Joseph, the Emperor. The later Habsburgs had a great deal of trouble with people not liking them. Franz Joseph's wife in the late 19th century was murdered herself in Switzerland by a fanatic, and of course, as we know, Franz Ferdinand and his wife were killed in Sarajevo. But Franz Joseph survived, and so they commissioned this church to be built, and it took them just 26 years using modern building techniques, but they used Gothic style design and stone. It is absolutely beautiful. Its twin spires at the front seem to float on air. It is just the most beautiful church, and it's lovely when it's illuminated at night. But my favourite building is not a church, and it is only 1 block from here with the university in between, and that is the Rathaus. And like the Volvic Church, it is a neo-classical design, a neo-Gothic design, if you will, and so this too was built in the 19th century, but it just had a certain flowing elegance about it, really beautifully designed, and it would be wrong for me to call it a Disney castle, but it is quite obvious that Walt and his creatives borrowed heavily from the Rathaus to create some of their ideas about how Gothic architecture should look. It's absolutely beautiful, and it's well worth a visit. They all are. It really is part of the wonderful landscape and the architecture that is Vienna. We end more or less where it started for me, with another cultural reference. Not the Habsburgs or the music, but a movie from the 1950s that sort of got into my soul, even though I wasn't around in the 1950s. The movie is The Third Man, and it stars Orson Welles as Harry Lime. Joseph Cotten was made by the great British film director Carol Reed. Wells plays a con man. He doesn't appear much in the movie, and I'm not going to give the movie away because that would be a spoiler alert. Just to say that there is a scene in the middle of the movie that takes place here at Prater, the fun fair in the middle of Vienna. It's been here for hundreds and hundreds of years, and towering above it is its famed old Ferris wheel with its red riding cars. And yesterday I came to Prater for the first time, and I rode the cars as Orson Welles and Joseph Cotten had in that movie, and I was quite emotional. What an experience that was. It's a seminal moment in a famous movie, and it is a scene that has stuck with me, and I think sticks with many people who ever see The Third Man. Not that you know the cars are red, because the film was made in black and white. That just concludes really my thoughts on this extraordinary city. I have only scratched the surface. I don't pretend that I've given you everything that Vienna has to offer, but I hope, if you haven't been, it gives you the encouragement to come and visit what has been, I have to say, a most extraordinary city. Goodbye.